1. The Ghost of Nell Cropsey. On the night of November 20th, 1901, a young woman named Ella M. Cropsey, called Nell by her family and friends, disappeared from her home in Elizabeth City. 37 days later, her body was found floating in the Pasquotank River. Despite a man having been convicted of her murder, many questions about her death remain unanswered, and some say that her uneasy spirit still haunts her home in Elizabeth City. The Cropsey family had moved to Elizabeth City in 1898 from Brooklyn, New York. Young Nell Cropsey was a beautiful woman from a wealthy family, and in her new home she was soon attracting the attention of suitors. Nell began being courted by a local man named Jim Wilcox. At the time of her disappearance, Wilcox and Cropsey had been courting for nearly 3 years, and it's said that Nell was growing impatient with Jim Wilcox's hesitancy to propose marriage. Nell Cropsey began flirting with other men in public in an attempt to spurn Wilcox into proposing. But her plan seems to have gone awry. On the evening of November 20th, 1901, Cropsey and Wilcox had an argument. The fight was loud, and everyone in the household could hear that the two lovers were yelling at one another, even if what they were saying couldn't be understood. Some of Nell's family who were in the house at the time did say that she and Wilcox had tentatively made up by the end of the evening, but no one ever learned where the lovers truly stood at the end of that night. When Nell Cropsey stepped outside the door with Wilcox around 11 that night, it was the last time she was ever seen alive. Ollie Cropsey, Nell's sister, heard something bang against the back of the house shortly after Jim Wilcox left. Going out to investigate, she found that the screen door had been broken. She saw no sign of who or what had broken the door. Ollie Cropsey went upstairs to see if Nell was already in bed, but found her sister's room empty. Uneasy about her sister's absence, she nevertheless returned to her own room and attempted to sleep. Shortly thereafter, a neighbor woke the entire house. The neighbor was yelling that someone was trying to steal the Cropsey's pig. The entire family rushed downstairs, where they found the front door hanging wide open, and the entire family realized that Nell was not there. Jim Wilcox's umbrella, a gift from Nell, was standing inside the door. No one had noticed it there earlier that night. When morning came and Nell Cropsey was still missing, the hunt began in earnest. The police were summoned and the entire town was searched high and low, but no trace of Nell was found. Suspicion for Nell's disappearance immediately fell on Jim Wilcox, who maintained that he had no idea what had happened to her. This wasn't good enough for the police. Wilcox was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and held in the local jail. With Wilcox sitting in jail and Nell still missing, the family remained in limbo. This ended on the night of December 27th, more than a month after Nell's disappearance. Mrs. Cropsey spotted something floating in the Pasquotank River near the family home. Sending some boatmen out to investigate, she crushingly realized that her long vigil was over. What she had seen floating in the river was her daughter's body. And one of the most astounding occurrences in the case, a few days before Nell's body was discovered, the family had received a letter with a New York postmark containing what claimed to be a detailed account of the events of the night of Nell's disappearance. The letter stated that Nell Cropsey had interrupted a vagrant attempting to steal the family pig. Upon being discovered, the man grabbed a heavy stick and knocked Nell unconscious. The unknown man carried Nell down to the river and stole a convenient boat. He rowed out into the river and dumped Nell Cropsey in the Pasquotank. The letter included a map which marked the spot where the body could be found. The spot marked on the map was very close to where Nell Cropsey's body was eventually discovered. Who sent this letter, and if the events it recounts were what truly happened that night, remain unknown to this day. With the discovery of Cropsey's body, the town went mad. A lynch mob descended on the jail, demanding Wilcox be released into their hands. Nell's parents refused to join the mob and pleaded with the crowd to let justice be served in the courts. Eventually, Governor Aycock sent in a small naval reserve group to disperse the crowd. Wilcox was tried twice for Cropsey's murder. At the first trial, he was found guilty, but this conviction was overturned when the North Carolina Supreme Court declared a mistrial. A second trial convicted Wilcox on a charge of second-degree murder and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. At neither trial did Wilcox take the stand in his own defense. Wilcox was pardoned by Governor Thomas Bickett in 1920. To the end of his life, Wilcox maintained his innocence. Shortly before his death in 1932, Wilcox spoke with W.O. Saunders, the editor of the Elizabeth City newspaper, and revealed everything he knew about the murder. Saunders walked away from the interview, convinced Wilcox was innocent, and planned to publish the full details. 2 weeks after that interview, Jim Wilcox committed suicide. Saunders died shortly thereafter in a car accident. Whatever Wilcox had told Saunders would now never be heard. For the past century, those who have lived in the Cropsey home have reported strange happenings. Lights have gone off and on by themselves. Doors open and shut of their own accord, and strange gusts of cold air move through the house. The pale figure of a young woman has also been seen moving through the house. Many people passing by on the street outside have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a girl looking out of an upstairs window. Residents even say that the figure of Nell Cropsey has appeared in their bedrooms at night. Is the unfortunate victim of one of North Carolina's most famous and sensational murder cases still wandering through her home in Elizabeth City? Will the true facts around Nell Cropsey's murder ever be known? This enduring mystery has become part of the living history of Elizabeth City, and no visit to this quiet coastal town is complete without a walk by the Cropsey home. Two, the Ghost in Skinflint's Mine. North Carolina was home to America's first gold rush. When John Reed discovered gold on his property in 1799, he didn't first realize what he had. Reed's son Conrad discovered a large yellow rock in the creek that ran through the Reed farm. The family used the unusual stone as a doorstop until 1802, when a jeweler from Fayetteville who was passing through recognized the rock as gold and paid Reed $3.50 for it, money which Reed used to buy coffee beans and a calico dress for his wife. Later, Reed discovered that the actual retail value of the rock had been over $3,500. Reed successfully recovered $1,000 of that when the jeweler returned to buy more rocks from him. Word of the discovery soon spread, and what had until then been a quiet corner of Cabarrus County was soon covered with prospectors from across the world. North Carolina would remain America's leading producer of gold until the discovery of the precious metal in California in 1848. Reed's farm became the center of this gold fever, with the mine expanding from surface panning to shafts dug deep beneath the earth in search of loads of ore. Labor was imported from all across the world, and expert miners from Cornwall in England were brought in to establish the operations. Apart from the expertise these men brought, the immigration was fueled in part by local labor being still heavily dependent upon slavery. There was a general fear that slaves would pocket the gold and quite sensibly use it to buy their freedom. The Reed gold mine expanded, helping the growth of the nearby city of Charlotte. For nearly 40 years, North Carolina supplied the U.S. Mint with a substantial portion of its gold, reaching a staggering, for the time, $11,000 in 1804 alone. But where there's gold, there's greed, and where there's greed, there's violence. One property near Reed's, where gold was also found, was owned by a man named McIntosh, remembered to legend as Skinflint McIntosh. McIntosh sought the services of an expert miner named Joe McGee, but McGee was concerned over the tight-fisted mine owner's lack of concern for miners' safety. McGee asked McIntosh if he took the job and died in the mine, would McIntosh pay his widow $1,000. McIntosh responded that he would pay her $2,000, and so McGee went to work for Skinflint. One night, Joe McGee failed to return home. His wife, Jenny, rounded up his friends and formed a search party. Joe's friends, all experienced miners, searched all of Skinflint's mine, but found nothing. When several weeks passed, and with her husband still missing, Jenny McGee approached McIntosh, demanding the promised payment of $2,000. Skinflint told the woman that her husband had run off on her, and slammed the door in the woman's face. Soon after, McGee's friend Sean heard a knocking on his cabin door late one night. When he opened the door, he was startled to see a ghastly apparition, a specter that spoke to him in the voice of Joe McGee. The ghost told him that McIntosh had cut costs on building the mine and had used unsafe green timbers to secure the shaft. McGee's specter told Sean exactly where to look in the mine, where the timbers had given way and he had died in the cave-in. And then the ghost asked if McIntosh had paid Jenny the money. When Sean said no, the ghost wailed and said, "I'll haunt that mine of his forever," and disappeared into the night. The next day, Sean led a party back into the mine and uncovered Joe's body just where the ghost told him it would be. Sean and his friends formed a well-armed delegation and confronted McIntosh, who confessed he had known of Joe's death and concealed it from the miner's widow. Mackintosh paid Jenny the promised $2,000. After this, Mackintosh could not find anyone willing to work for him. Some say it was because of his disregard for the workers' safety. Others say it was because of the terrifying white figure that would appear, wailing, deep in the mine. Skinflint Mackintosh died a poor man, and some say that the ghost of Skinflint's mine can still be seen to this day. (3) The Thirsty Skull. For many years, something very strange has been happening in the small town of Fremont. At certain times, a strange light emerges from a graveyard and travels over to the nearby railroad tracks. The light will hover around the railroad tracks, sometimes moving back and forth, up and down. If someone approaches, the light will move closer, as if it has a question to ask. Before dawn, the light will travel back to the cemetery and disappear into one particular grave. The story of what this light is and how it came to be takes us back to a time when Fremont was a little more exciting than the quiet town that it is now. Back more than a century ago, horse racing, cockfighting, and gambling were all common pastimes in North Carolina. Fremont, being right on the newly built railroad line and halfway between Wilson and Goldsboro, would throw festivities every summer. Tourists would take day trips from the cities to the little town to take part in the excitement and to enjoy the whiskey that flowed freely all day. In Fremont, one of the regulars at the events was a local man by the name of Bolton. Bolton was a giant of a man, massively built, a hulk of muscle and bone. He was also a very, very heavy drinker. Whenever there was racing and gambling going on, Bolton would work the crowd performing feats of strength in exchange for a drink. His signature trick was smashing a whiskey barrel to pieces using his giant head. He would celebrate his triumph by gulping down the whiskey that the appreciative onlookers passed his way. On one of these festival days, the weather was good. The crowd was large and generous, and Bolton had drunk more than even his usual share. He began to boast, saying he could smash anything with his head. He was soon breaking bottles and 2x4s on his head without seeming to feel any pain. As he became more and more drunk, Bolton's boasting grew until he declared he could stop a train with his head. By this time, the crowd was nearly as drunk as Bolton, and they cheered him on as he swaggered down to the railroad tracks and stood right in the middle of the line, sticking his big head out in the direction of the next arrival. In those days, trains ran on time, and so, before too long, the crowd heard the whistle and the rumble of the express rolling down the tracks. Now the sound of an oncoming train was enough to sober up a few of the crowd, who tried to pull Bolton off of the tracks. But he refused, and as the train drew even closer, he loudly proclaimed that he was tougher than any train. The train soon proved him to be very, very wrong about that. The crowd gathered what remained of Bolton and carried him down to the graveyard. They found the local preacher and poured enough coffee into him so that he was sober enough to say a few words. After they had buried him, the drinking and carousing continued, but became a wake for Bolton. Folks figured he would have wanted it that way. Ever since that night, that mysterious light has been seen rising out of the graveyard and traveling to the spot on the railroad tracks where Bolton met his end. Folks who have gotten close enough to the light to get a good look say that inside that eerie green glow seems to be the shape of a particularly large human skull. And a few have even said they've heard a spectral voice coming from the glow. The voice is indistinct, as if coming from another world, but it seems to be asking a question. It wants to know if they can spare any whiskey. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Abysmal Channel. I decided to end on a slightly lighter note with that last story. Even though a man got his head smashed in by a train, it was a little more of a silly, lighthearted story. I've been feeling a little down lately, so having a little bit more of a lighthearted ending to this rather dark video definitely helped. Thank you again for listening, and please do like and subscribe and hit that bell. Any support at all helps me greatly, as I'm just starting out, and I'm very much enjoying this, and I would love to be able to do it a little more often. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.